The silence at Grand Central Terminal is more deafening than the roar of the rush hour. Imagine standing on a platform, your breath hitching in the sub-zero air of a New York winter, staring at a stationary train that refuses to move. There is no announcement, only the rising tide of an angry crowd. You swipe your Metro card or tap your phone out of habit, but today the turnstiles lead nowhere. This isn't a simple mechanical failure. It is a heart attack in the very arteries of the city. We are witnessing the beginning of a transportation collapse that threatens to paralyze the most economically vital regions of the United States. Do you ever stop to think about where the train you step onto actually comes from? Most of you assume that because the subway is the beating heart of New York, Chicago, or New Jersey, it is a domestic product built by Americans, for Americans. But the reality is a brutal lesson in global capitalism. What is unfolding right now between Donald Trump and Mark Carney is a high-stakes game of economic chicken, and the millions of workers standing on these frozen platforms are the collateral damage. The big surprise is that your commute is currently a hostage. Mark Carney, in a strategic countermove against American protectionist threats, has targeted the supply chain of rail cars. Specifically, he is strangling the flow of parts and maintenance equipment for Bombardier and Alstom fleets. These trains aren't just objects. They are highly complex, proprietary Canadian machines. By putting these fleets on life support, Carney is proving that you don't need to bomb a city to paralyze it. You just need to interrupt the metabolic process of its maintenance cycle. If the parts stop flowing, the trains don't just slow down. They stop. Millions of nurses, teachers, and service workers are about to be stranded because of a contract dispute signed thousands of miles away. While the elites in gold-plated penthouses can opt for private car services or helicopters, the working class is being squeezed until the metropolis suffocates. The fuse has been lit, and the urban warfare of trade deficits is being fought at your station. The technician in the depot is staring at a broken braking unit he cannot fix with local tools because the key to your mobility is currently sitting in a warehouse in Quebec. The golden handcuffs. Bombardier, Alstom, and the Canadian trap. In a dimly lit maintenance depot in Queens, a veteran technician stands over a dismantled braking control unit for an R179 subway car. He wipes grease from his forehead, staring at a frayed circuit board and a proprietary sensor that has finally given out after thousands of miles of service. He reaches for his toolbox, but he already knows the specialized calibration hardware required to reset this specific module isn't in the shop. In fact, it isn't anywhere in the 5 boroughs. This is the material reality of technological lock-in. A silent surrender of sovereignty that happened years ago when the MTA and CTA signed multi-billion-dollar contracts with giants like Bombardier and Alstom. While the tracks are hammered into the very bedrock of Manhattan, the intelligence running on them was outsourced long ago to Quebec. This dependency has created what can only be described as a set of golden handcuffs. We were told that globalization would bring efficiency and state-of-the-art technology. But we failed to realize that these proprietary systems are not public services. They are market relationships. You cannot simply go to a local hardware store to find a replacement part for a train carrying 2,000 people at rush hour. These components are the result of decades of industrial specialization, and the United States, in its rush to deindustrialize, has hollowed out its own capacity to produce them. To understand why your commute is failing, you have to view the subway system as a biological organism. Maintenance is its metabolic process. Every time the heavy doors cycle at Union Square, every time the brakes screech into a station under the weight of 1,000 commuters, the machine degrades. It is a constant, rhythmic wearing down of metal and silicon. To survive, the organism requires a steady stream of specialized nutrients, spare parts, software updates, and proprietary sensors. Mark Carney understands this metabolic reality better than almost anyone. He isn't using a sledgehammer to disrupt the American metropolis. He is using a scalpel. By threatening to halt the flow of these shipments across the border, he is effectively starving the organism. The scalpel strategy is ruthless because it targets the maintenance cycle rather than the finished product. A subway car is not a static object you buy once and own forever. It is a continuous service. When the supply lines from Canada are severed, the decay begins immediately. At first, the transit authorities attempt to hide the decline. They begin cannibalizing older trains, stripping parts from one stationary R-179 car to keep another moving. It is a desperate, short-term measure that reduces the total fleet size day by day. Then they stretch safety intervals, running trains longer than they should without service, praying that the braking mechanisms hold. But eventually, the risk becomes too high. When a proprietary component fails and there is no replacement coming from the north, the train is pulled from the tracks, and it stays pulled. This is the hidden story behind the headlines of transportation collapse. It is the direct result of an economic system that prioritized corporate efficiency over public resilience. For decades, the narrative was that borders didn't matter as long as commerce flowed smoothly. We assumed the parts would always arrive and the maintenance schedules would always be met. But as the trade war between Donald Trump and Mark Carney escalates, that fragile web of international contracts is being shredded. The distance between a functioning society and social collapse is exactly the distance between a warehouse in Montreal and a maintenance depot in Queens. As the shipments stall at the border, the physical degradation of the American transit fleet accelerates, turning modern marvels of engineering into stationary museum pieces. The technician in Queens sets down his wrench, realizing that his skills are useless without the technical inputs that are now being used as bargaining chips in a global power struggle. This systemic vulnerability reveals a profound lack of sovereignty for the American commuter. Your ability to move from point A to point B is not guaranteed by your government, but permitted by the whims of international trade disputes. We have built our greatest cities on the assumption of seamless logistical support, only to find that we no longer hold the keys to our own infrastructure. The golden handcuffs are tightening, and the heart attack in the city's arteries is no longer a metaphor, it is an engineering certainty. As the inventory of essential parts dwindles to zero, the efficiency of the just-in-time economy is finally being felt on the overcrowded platforms. The lean system has no margin for error, and the shock of this trade war is pushing it toward a complete operational standstill. The question we must ask is why we allowed our most critical public goods to become so exposed. Why did we trade domestic manufacturing for the illusion of cheap, outsourced technology? As the trains sit idle and the anger on the platforms begins to boil, it becomes clear that the golden handcuffs were never meant to protect the public. They were designed to maximize profit at the expense of stability. Now, as the metabolic process of the subway system grinds to a halt, the wreckage of this choice is left for the working class to live in. The warehouse shelves are empty, the border is closed, and the silence in the maintenance depot is the sound of a system that has lost control over its own material foundations. Just in time, out of luck. The cult of efficiency. The systemic failure of the transit system is not merely an engineering crisis. It is the logical conclusion of an economic ideology that has hollowed out the public sector. As the golden handcuffs of proprietary Canadian technology tighten, they reveal a deeper rot. The cult of efficiency. For 40 years, the guiding principle of our urban infrastructure has been the just-in-time inventory model. In the air-conditioned boardrooms of business schools and private consulting firms, this was praised as the pinnacle of modern management. The idea was simple. Storing spare parts in a warehouse is a waste of capital. Why have 100 braking control units sitting on a shelf in Brooklyn when you can order them as needed? By eliminating these buffers, transit authorities were told they could run lean, saving pennies on warehousing while maximizing corporate efficiency. However, lean is just another word for fragile. This anarchy of production prioritizes short-term financial metrics over long-term resilience. We are seeing the consequences of running public services like private corporations. A resilient public service, one designed to protect the public interest, would maintain months of strategic reserves. A profit-minded or budget-cutting entity maintains supplies for only a few days. The warehouses were emptied to satisfy the demands of capital. And now that the global supply chain has snapped under the weight of a trade war, the American metropolis is out of luck. Let me tell you a story that isn't in the business brochures. Picture a maintenance supervisor in Chicago staring at a fleet of Alstom trains during a blizzard. He has 3 trains down with door motor failures. He checks the inventory system, it's 0. Why? Because the efficient model decided that keeping those motors in stock was idle capital. He calls the supplier in Quebec, only to find the shipment is stuck behind a new tariff wall. He has to tell thousands of commuters standing in the freezing cold that their train isn't coming. Not because we can't build motors, but because a spreadsheet somewhere said it was cheaper not to have them. Does that feel like efficiency to you, or does it feel like a betrayal? The reality on the ground is a transit system stripped to the bone with 0 margin for error. When Mark Carney interrupts the flow of specialized commodities, there is no backup. The strategic reserve, which should have been a shield for the American commuter, simply does not exist. We saved a few cents on inventory costs and risked the collapse of the entire regional economy. This is the ultimate irony of capitalist efficiency. It creates a system so optimized for a perfect world that it becomes paralyzed by the slightest shock. In a world of trade wars and geopolitical games, just in time becomes too late. As the clock ticks toward a total system standstill, the desperation within maintenance depots has reached a fever pitch. Transit authorities have resorted to cannibalization, a term that captures the gruesome nature of the process. Technicians are forced to strip a functioning door motor or a critical sensor from an older subway car just to keep a newer one running for another day. It is a metabolic process of self-consumption. We are eating our own infrastructure to survive the next 24 hours. This isn't a sustainable maintenance plan. It is a countdown to a complete operational heart attack. Every part taken from one train represents a permanent reduction in the total fleet size. We are witnessing the slow-motion deconstruction of our city's lifeblood. Think about the sheer insanity of this. We have the world's most advanced economy, yet our technicians are acting like scavengers in a post-apocalyptic movie, picking through the carcasses of multi-million-dollar trains just to get you to work on Monday. If you think this is a temporary glitch, you're missing the plot twist. This scarcity is manufactured. It is the result of a system that views your daily commute as a bargaining chip rather than a human necessity. This manufactured scarcity is a direct result of the prioritization of capital over public mobility. The needs of the commuter, the nurse, the teacher, the construction worker were never part of the calculus in the just-in-time model. In the calculus of power, share prices and trade leverage matter more than the ability of a worker to reach their job. We have the technical ability to run trains and the labor force ready to fix them, but we are blocked by artificial barriers of trade war and profit protection. The train is sitting there, the driver is ready, but the machinery is starving for parts that are held hostage at the border. The anarchy of production has turned our most vital public goods into bargaining chips in a game we were never invited to play. The distance between a functioning society and social collapse is widening as the strategic reserves run dry. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice made by a ruling class that values leverage over human need. They broke the system by removing the margins for error, assuming the world would always be seamless. Now, as the arteries of our cities clog, the anger on the platforms is beginning to boil over. If you're tired of being a hostage in this game of economic chicken, you need to act now. Don't wait for the next total shutdown to ask why our cities are so fragile. Share this information. Demand that our transit authorities build local strategic reserves and stop accepting efficiency as an excuse for crumbling service. If we don't demand resilience now, the silence on the tracks will become permanent. The people who will be stranded are not the ones who made these decisions, but they are the ones who will live in the wreckage of this efficient disaster. The silence on the tracks is the sound of a narrative collapsing, as the working class realizes their daily survival has been outsourced to a system that cares nothing for their well-being. The wealthy have insulated themselves. But for the mass of the population, the breakdown of the subway is a violation of the social contract itself. We are trapped in a city that relies on movement, only to find that the gears have been stripped for parts. Comment below if you've felt the impact of these lean cuts on your own commute. Let's show them how many of us are paying the price for their efficiency. Stick around, because next we're diving into the shocking truth about who actually profits when the system breaks down. Urban warfare. The class divide on the platform. While we witness the slow-motion deconstruction of our city's lifeblood through the failure of inventory management, the crisis shifts from a technical nightmare into a full-scale social tragedy. This isn't just about delayed shipments or empty warehouses anymore. It is about the urban warfare that erupts when the class divide is exposed on a cold, crowded platform. Imagine a single mother standing on a platform on the south side of Chicago. She's been up since 4 a.m. Her breath visible in the freezing morning air. She taps her phone at the turnstile, but the screen flashes red. No trains. Not in 10 minutes. Not in an hour. She realizes with a sinking feeling that she is going to miss her shift at the hospital. Her supervisor has already warned her about unreliable attendance. If she loses this job, the rent doesn't get paid. For her, just in time wasn't a business theory. It was the social contract she relied on to feed her children. Does the CEO of the Transit Authority know her name? Of course not. She is just a rounding error in a budget report. Contrast her situation with the ivory towers of the financial district. While she is stranded, hedge fund managers and high-level technocrats are bypassing the chaos entirely. They don't need the A train or the L line. They have private car services waiting at their doorsteps or helicopters warming up on helipads to ferry them over the gridlock. To them, the transit collapse is an abstract data point on a screen, a variable in a trade negotiation. But to the woman in Brooklyn or the worker in Queens, it is a direct assault on their livelihood. This is the shredding of the social contract. In a city like New York, you agree to pay exorbitant rents, high taxes, and endure the crushing density in exchange for one basic thing: movement. You expect the lights to turn on, the water to run, and the trains to move. This is the silent agreement that keeps the city alive. When Donald Trump and Mark Carney decide to use public infrastructure as a bargaining chip, they are effectively declaring that your mobility is a luxury, not a right. They are telling you that the agreement only works when it benefits the ruling class. The subway has long been called the Great Equalizer, the one place where the billionaire and the barista sit side by side. But when the system stops, that illusion vanishes. It reveals a stark class divide where your survival depends on how much you can pay to avoid the anarchy of the public sector. Carney is striking at what economists call the reproduction of labor. It's a fancy term for a simple, brutal reality. If a worker cannot physically get to the job that exploits them, the cycle of capital breaks. You can't run a hospital, a school, or a stock exchange if the human fuel can't reach the engine. When you hear about a riot at Grand Central Terminal, do not mistake it for random malice. It is the language of desperation. It is the sound of millions of people realizing they have been held hostage in a high-stakes game of chicken they were never invited to. They are angry because they have followed the rules, paid their fares, and worked their shifts, only to be told they are collateral damage in a trade war over aluminum and timber. Think about it. Would you stay calm if your entire future was being traded away for a tariff percentage? This is the true face of economic war. It doesn't look like soldiers on a battlefield. It looks like a nurse losing her job because a politician and a central banker are fighting over trade deficits. It looks like a student missing an exam because a proprietary brake pad is sitting in a warehouse in Quebec. We have allowed the basic functioning of our daily lives to be outsourced to a system that cares absolutely nothing for the human reality on the ground. This is a manufactured crisis, designed in boardrooms and weaponized by technocrats. If you are standing on one of those platforms tomorrow, look around you. Realize that your commute isn't guaranteed by the government or by God. It is permitted by a fragile web of international contracts that are currently being torn apart. Ask yourself, who is really paying the price for this efficiency? Is it the clever men in suits talking about tariffs and leverage, or is it you? We cannot stay silent while our cities are treated like bargaining chips. If you have been stranded, if you have lost wages, or if you are simply fed up with being collateral damage, now is the time to act. Comment below with your station and how many hours you've lost this week. Let's map the real cost of this sabotage together. Share this video immediately. If we don't expose this divide now, they will continue to strip our cities for parts until there is nothing left. Smash that like button to help this reach more commuters before the morning rush. Take one practical step today. Find out who represents you on your local transit board and send one email demanding a domestic strategic reserve of parts. Do not let them tell you it's too expensive. They've already spent your mobility on a trade war. We need to wake up before the heart attack in our cities becomes fatal. Stay with us, because in the next section, we are going to look at the massive blind spot in Trump's nationalist strategy that made this sabotage possible. You won't believe how easily the city that never sleeps was put into a coma. Interdependence, or sabotage, Trump's 19th century blind spot. As the urban transit crisis deepens and the social contract shreds on the platforms of Brooklyn and Chicago, we must look beyond the immediate chaos to the political theater driving this sabotage. The current standoff between Donald Trump and Mark Carney is not just a disagreement over trade. It is a profound collision between 19th century economic logic and the complex, hyper-connected reality of the 21st century. Donald Trump views the global economy through a lens of boxes and tariffs. In his worldview, a subway car is a static product, a box you buy once and tax at the border. He assumes that by slapping tariffs on Canadian lumber, aluminum, or steel, he can bully his neighbor into submission without feeling the blowback at home. This is the ultimate blind spot of economic nationalism. It fails to grasp that in a modern economy, a subway system is not a product. It is a continuous metabolic process. The irony here is almost too bitter to swallow. Trump obsesses over the Dow Jones Industrial Average as the sole measure of his success. He tweets about stock market records as proof of American greatness. Yet, the Dow Jones cannot function if the people who do the actual work are stuck in a tunnel in Queens. The trading floors of Wall Street might have the most advanced fiber optic cables and backup generators in the world, but they are utterly useless if the administrative assistants, the IT support staff, the security guards, and the janitors who keep those glass towers running are stranded on a frozen platform. Carney is ruthlessly exploiting this interdependence. He is forcing Trump to explain to his own donors, the titans of finance and the masters of the market, why their multi-billion-dollar operations are grinding to a halt. Carney is effectively saying, "If you want to play hardball with tariffs, I will shut down the factory of your wealth by striking at the logistics of labor itself." This situation reveals the true weight of the golden handcuffs we discussed earlier. Mark Carney understands the financial plumbing of the world better than almost anyone. He knows that the American metropolis is no longer a sovereign island. It is woven into a global tapestry. You cannot declare war on the country that builds your veins and arteries without suffering a massive heart attack. While Trump talks about the deal as if he's still selling real estate in the 1,980 seconds, Carney is dangling the key to American mobility over the Atlantic Ocean. He knows that the proprietary software and high-tech components for the Alstom and Bombardier fleets cannot be replaced by domestic manufacturing overnight. We have spent 40 years deindustrializing our own capacity, and now we are paying the price in real time. The impact on the financial markets is already becoming visible. Stock indices for major retailers and financial services are beginning to flutter as the realization sets in. A city that cannot move is a city that cannot consume or produce. Wall Street donors are reportedly growing restless, privately questioning the wisdom of a trade war that sabotages the very infrastructure their employees rely on. They understand what the nationalist rhetoric ignores. Interdependence is not a choice, it is a material fact. If the specialized commodities, the brake pads, the circuit boards, the proprietary sensors stop flowing from the north, the indispensable market of the United States becomes a museum of stationary objects. This is the arrogance of a certain type of nationalist capitalism. It wants all the benefits of global extraction, the cheap resources, and specialized imports without the vulnerability that comes with them. But the world doesn't work that way. When you outsource the expertise and the supply lines to your neighbor, you are entering into a marriage of necessity. Trump's attempt to blow up that relationship for political posturing isn't punishing a foreign adversary. It is an act of domestic sabotage. He is declaring war on his own commuters, his own workers, and ultimately, his own economic legacy. As we watch this high-stakes game of chicken, the question remains: how much longer can the city that never sleeps stay in this coma? Carney's scalpel has found the exact pressure point where American wealth is most vulnerable. The Dow Jones might be a collection of numbers, but those numbers are generated by people who need to get to work. By weaponizing the supply chain, Carney has turned the subway into the ultimate choke point. Do you think the dealmaker has finally met his match in a technocrat who knows how the gears actually turn? Comment below with your thoughts on whether this is strategic brilliance or cold-blooded sabotage. If you're tired of being the fuel for this fire, share this video to show the world the reality of the 21st century economy that our leaders seem to have forgotten. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because our final section is going to reveal the devastating long-term wreckage we will be forced to live in once the smoke clears. The train is at the station, the doors are closing, and the key is in Montreal. Don't go anywhere. Living in the wreckage, the choice we didn't make. As the political posturing continues and the clever men in suits exchange threats across the Atlantic, the material reality remains unchanged. The trains are still stationary, and the city is slipping into a coma. This collapse is not a natural disaster. It is not an act of God or an unavoidable catastrophe of nature. It is a choice. We are standing on the precipice of a transportation shutdown because a select few decided to value leverage over human need, prioritizing the anarchy of production over the stability of the public square. The distance between a functioning society and social collapse has never been clearer. It is exactly the distance between a brake pad sitting in a warehouse in Montreal and a train car waiting on a platform in Brooklyn. When you realize that your basic ability to move, to work, and to live your life is permitted only by a fragile web of international contracts, you begin to understand the true loss of sovereignty. You are told you live in a free society, yet you are not free to commute if a foreign corporation decides to weaponize a supply chain. Your freedom is conditional, outsourced to a market that cares absolutely nothing for your well-being. We must look past the headlines of Trump versus Carney and look at the machinery of the system itself. We allowed our domestic manufacturing base to atrophy to the point where we cannot even maintain our own veins and arteries. We hollowed out the public sector, turning transit agencies into mere purchasers of services rather than masters of their own destiny. This manufactured scarcity is the wreckage we are now forced to live in, the result of choosing fragile, profitable global chains over robust local capacity. Picture the scene one final time. The driver is in the cab, ready to go. The passengers are packed onto the platform, checking their watches with mounting desperation. The technology is all there, sitting on the tracks. But the train does not move. It cannot move because a contract dispute thousands of miles away says it isn't allowed to. This is the ultimate absurdity of our current era. We have the technical ability and the labor force ready, but we are blocked by artificial barriers of trade, war, and profit protection. As the silence on the tracks grows, remember that this was a choice made by people who will never have to squeeze into a crowded subway car. They broke the system, and now we are left to survive within its wreckage.